The FBI continues its investigation into the deadly shooting of conservative activist Charlie Kirk. There are close eyes watching the director of the agency, Kash Patel, who's faced increased scrutiny over his handling not just of this case, but his job overall. Back with us, Rob D'Amico, Rachel Bade. Rob, I want to get to you first. There's a lot of reporting out there and also public statements from pretty influential conservative figures that Patel's behavior has eroded trust in the Bureau and his ability to do this job. What are you hearing within FBI ranks right now?
When Kash Patel first took over the Bureau, there was a lot of agents that wanted change, that saw that the Bureau was going ways that they hadn't seen in a while, and they wanted it back, so to speak. And a lot of them were retired or senior agents, and they wanted to give Kash Patel a chance because his qualifications were coming up as lacking in that ability. Everything I saw, LinkedIn, Facebook groups with FBI, some were against it, but the majority were like, "Hey, give him a chance." And what I see now is that is eroding heavily within current FBI and former FBI. And the current ones it actually started eroding quicker because the firings and some of the other things that were going on that they heard internally. The retired ones who have friends that they talk to in the Bureau, I think we're still giving a chance. And I think the firing of Driscoll and the other ones, and Driscoll's a friend of mine. He was HRT commander. He's on HRT when I was there. Very well respected. When they were fired without due cause, even the Agent Association, the Society of Former Agents came out with formal letters. And I think that really was a big step for everyone to say, wait a second, these people are patriots. They've been doing their job. And I just don't think that they understand how an agent can still work, can have certain political views, but it doesn't involve their work. There was some of that in there, but I don't think they could think someone working on the January 6th trial or one of the trials on Trump actually was in support of Trump. But you're told to do a job, you're FBI, you're apolitical, and you do it. I don't think they can comprehend that. I think they thought anyone working on that was anti-Trump, and they're not. Some of the people he fired were extremely conservative in their personal beliefs. But you just didn't know that at work. You never really talked politics. So I really think it's eroding. I think we've hit that, and I think now what you saw with the post on X that he's in custody and having to take that back has now, spread that maybe questioning over to the White House and other folks.
And Rachel, that's why I want to bring you in. Last night, our colleague Ryan Riley had some really interesting reporting that Patel was at Rao's, this very fancy restaurant in New York City, the night of the post. So Patel tweeted at 6:21 that the subject in Kirk's killing was in custody. He tweeted at 7:59 that the, quote, subject in custody has been released after an interrogation by law enforcement. The restaurant opens at 7 p.m. If the FBI and the rank and file is concerned a little bit about Patel, how he has operated over the last few days, how is the president and how is the White House taking this in? Because one thing Donald Trump hates to be is embarrassed by by folks that work for him.
Yeah, definitely doesn't like to be embarrassed, and these are not good looks.
Yeah.
I can't speak directly to what Donald Trump thinks about him right now. I can tell you that there are some people in the administration who are definitely frustrated. And I think Kash Patel, he's feeling it right now. And you can see it in the reporting. I mean, there was this great nugget in a New York Times story yesterday or the day before about how he erupted and yelled at 200 agents across the country who were working on this case because he said they didn't tell him that there was a picture of the suspect, even though apparently it was in his briefing stuff the whole time. But in a lot of ways, he's going to have to look in the mirror here because he cleaned house and he got rid of a bunch of experts who had been at the FBI for a long time, who had a lot of experience working on counterterrorism cases, domestic counterterrorism cases, specifically the one who was running the Salt Lake City office. And there are consequences to that when you get rid of people like he did. That's going to impact the investigation. And obviously, it wasn't the FBI that nabbed this guy. It was that they released the photos, and the father of this man was the one who helped turn him in. So, look, they're going to have to contend with this, and it's not a great look.
Rachel, just to put a finer point on it, Patel wasn't at just any restaurant. Rao's is one of the notoriously hardest restaurants to get into. So there's a whole exclusivity part to this story that I find interesting. But Eugene asked you about Patel standing within the White House.
Sure.
But what about Patel standing within the right-wing base of the party? I mean, this is a base that is still very upset about what has happened or not happened with the Epstein file. So could we be seeing what Patel is doing as a reaction to try to win back their favor or to get them to get off his back?
He's absolutely seen an erosion with support with the base. I mean, this is a guy who was a hero for MAGA world, a podcaster out there talking before, Trump took over. Was back in the White House talking about the Epstein files. And as you mentioned, he's already been getting grilled on the right because of that. And people sort of feeling that they're not being transparent about what went on with Epstein. Add this on top of that. And yeah, people are not happy. And you can see it if you look on Twitter at a lot of conservative commentators on Twitter who are saying it's time for us, people who support the Trump administration, to have a discussion about whether he's the right person to lead the FBI. So will it matter, I guess, is the question. It didn't matter with Attorney General Pam Bondi. I mean, we saw even more heat from her regarding Epstein, and the president stuck with her. So all that really matters is what Donald Trump thinks. And it's not yet clear if Trump would be displeased with him. At this point, they're still putting out statements for a lot of these stories saying that they're with him.
And I think in that same New York Times story that you were talking about, it was in that story that it was noted that when the president was talking about, I think it was the capture of the suspect, he mentioned everybody, particularly Pam Bondi, but didn't mention the FBI director.
Ooh, that's really interesting.
Rachel Bade, Rob D'Amico, thank you both very much for coming to The Weekend.
All right, good morning. It is Saturday, September the 13th. I'm Ali Velshi. If you happen to have your pocket constitution with you, it's going to become very useful in the next few minutes. This week, the Supreme Court gave federal agents the green light to geographically, racially, linguistically profile people in the course of immigration sweeps in Los Angeles. Now, in doing so, it shattered one of the bedrocks of the American legal tradition. And my goal today is to leave you with a clear understanding of just how grave this Supreme Court decision is. The Fourth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution begins with these words. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. The right of the people to be secure in their persons. Few parts of the Bill of Rights drew more directly from the lived experiences of Americans at the time than this one. American colonists lived under a British crown that tried to police their private lives, their communications, and their gatherings. The Townshend Acts of 1767 authorized writs of assistance, warrantless searches that let the king's men storm homes and shops at will. No reasonable suspicion needed, no rights, just raw power. The Coercive Acts of 1774 went further, forcing colonists to house British troops in their own homes. The presence of troops on their streets, in their homes, the intrusive raids, the constant surveillance, these were not abstract grievances. These were daily humiliations, a powder keg that helped to ignite the American Revolution, which is why the Constitution's framers drew a hard line. The Third and Fourth Amendments were their answer. A person's home, property, and person are off limits to arbitrary power because those are sacred spaces. The revolution was in no small part about declaring, here the government stops. A declaration that in America, the individual is sovereign. The government cannot treat people as suspects or enemies without cause. This week, the Supreme Court blew a hole straight through that principle. Tom Nichols writes in The Atlantic, quote, none of this is really about immigration. It's about the administration's attempt to inflame racial tensions and divide Americans and to acclimate them to the militarization of their streets and the stripping away of their constitutional protections, end quote. In the case that prompted this decision, by the way, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem v. Vasquez Perdomo, the Supreme Court stayed a lower court's order in California that had blocked the Trump administration from using what amounted to racial profiling to stop and question people that it I don't even know if they have to suspect them of being undocumented. They're just throwing things against the wall and saying, hey, here's a bunch of people. Some of you might be undocumented. In plainer English, ICE agents now have the high court's blessing to racially profile people during immigration sweeps in Los Angeles. They're allowed to stop people based solely on their apparent race or ethnicity, language or accent, the type of work they do, where they do it. The Fourth Amendment requires reasonable suspicion before anyone, any person, citizen or not, documented or not, can be stopped by law enforcement. The law is not allowed to just guess at that because of how you look or speak or where you live and work, that you might have committed a crime. Equal protection forbids race as a factor. The lower courts enforced that principle. The Supreme Court just erased it. And perhaps the most outrageous part, the conservative majority in the Supreme Court issued their decision using the so-called shadow docket, where the court rules on Trump administration's emergency motions without oral arguments or explanation. No hearing, no accountability, just judicial fiat, handed down in the dark. Justice Sonia Sotomayor, in her powerful dissent, wrote, quote, "We should not have to live in a country where the government can seize anyone who looks Latino, speaks Spanish, and appears to work a low-wage job. Rather than stand idly by while our constitutional freedoms are lost, I dissent." End quote. I dissent. This ruling isn't about immigration. It tells millions of Americans that your protection from unreasonable search and seizure depends on whether the government decides you look like you belong, which is not what the Constitution's framers envisioned, I hope. Certainly not democracy as we have come to know it in this country. Consider Brian Gavidia, a U.S. citizen from East Los Angeles, who voted for Trump, by the way. Shouldn't be relevant, but he did. He says federal agents shoved him against a fence, twisted his arm, and demanded to know which hospital he was born in, all because he looked Latino. In other words, because he looked like an immigrant, or let me put it more clearly, he looked like an undocumented immigrant. He told the agents repeatedly, "I am an American." They didn't believe him. Speaking to The Guardian, he says his business remains closed because he's afraid that agents might return. He worries he's being watched. Despite his fears, Brian says he won't stop speaking out. Quote, "I'm doing this with my legs shaking and my voice cracking because I'm scared, but I will not stay quiet." This is the new normal that the Supreme Court has sanctioned. And when Justice Brett Kavanaugh tried to defend it, his words only underscored how hollow his reasoning was. In his concurring opinion, the only one that was offered, by the way, reflecting solely his own views, he wrote, without a hint of irony, quote, "The interests of individuals who are illegally in the country in avoiding being stopped by law enforcement for questioning is ultimately an interest in evading the law. That is not an especially weighty legal interest." End quote. Kavanaugh's framing flips the entire constitutional order on its head. The Fourth Amendment is not about rewarding the innocent and punishing the guilty. It exists precisely to protect people even when the government suspects them of wrongdoing. Rights are not conditional favors granted after innocence is proven. They are the shield against arbitrary suspicion in the first place. Kavanaugh's distorted logic seems to suggest that if you're brown, you're guilty of an immigration violation until you're proven innocent. As one of the nation's top constitutional law experts, Erwin Chemerinsky, put it, the Supreme Court has abandoned basic constitutional principles, and the broader implications are darker still. Most of the Bill of Rights is premised on the idea that liberty is more important than granting government limitless discretion in the name of law enforcement. By Kavanaugh's reasoning, any Fourth Amendment protection could be reframed as nothing more than an interest in evading the law. I don't want police in my house because I'm just trying to evade the law. I don't want you looking through my papers because there's law-breaking stuff in there. That's not just sloppy logic. It's dangerous. It's an attack on the entire American legal tradition. And the fact that I have to stand here to report that the Bill of Rights is exactly that, a declaration of rights, not revocable privileges, because a Supreme Court decision suggests otherwise, says an awful lot. You know how many days of law school I have under my belt? 0. But this is where we are in 2025. It's not that the conservative justices don't understand the Constitution. It's that they seemingly don't care. As Chemerinsky observes, quote, "This is just the latest in a series of rulings in which the 6 conservative justices have approved Trump administrative actions that violate the Constitution. If the court does not uphold the Constitution and the rule of law, is there anything to protect our constitutional democracy?" And it bears repeating that most of the plaintiffs in these cases were U.S. citizens or lawful immigrants. In one case, ICE tackled and arrested a U.S. citizen and veteran, George Rettis, detaining him for 3 days following a worksite raid. Another U.S. citizen was tackled on her way to work. The 4'11" woman was then accused of assaulting the ICE agent by putting her hand out as the agent ran her over, according to NBC News reporting. Yet another was arrested and removed from his job because he did not carry his passport, only his driver's license. Can you imagine that? Just for all of you citizens out there, you are not compelled to carry your passport to show it to ICE agents. What this decision does is it normalizes roving patrols in a police state where constitutional rights shrink or vanish in the government if they declare you the enemy. Once the Fourth Amendment is treated as negotiable for one group, Latino communities, brown people in this case, it becomes weaker for all of us. And if we don't see the danger in that, if we don't call it what it is, we are in deeper trouble than we even realize. It all points to something bigger. The Supreme Court's conservative majority has essentially stopped pretending to be neutral arbiters of law. And using the so-called shadow docket has become their weapon of choice, used to gut precedent, to countenance overreach, to weaken democracy's foundations without public deliberation. No transparency, no accountability. It's just because we said so. And that should trouble every American, no matter what your politics or background. More than 2 centuries ago, Americans declared independence to rid themselves of kings and of unchecked power. Today, the Supreme Court appears to be dismantling those safeguards piece by piece, ruling as if its conservative majority serves one man, a president who thinks it's normal behavior to declare war on America's cities. This is who they've decided to hitch their legacy to, a would-be strongman who spits on the very Constitution that they swore to uphold, a man whose contempt for democracy will stain the Supreme Court not just today, not just this term, but possibly for generations to come. The Fourth Amendment was the framers' line in the sand. Here, the government stops. The Supreme Court may have just erased that line.
Poll numbers highlight President Trump's strengths and weaknesses as he looks to expand presidential power. Overall, 42% approve of the president's job performance, with 56% disapproving. Trump's approval on the economy, though, keeps falling, now at 36%, with just 30% approving on his handling on the cost of living. Michael Hardaway and Brendan Buck are back with me. So, guys, I'm starting with you, Michael. Are these numbers that Democrats should be pouncing on, since perceptions on the economy can drive elections?
They absolutely have to. Donald Trump, in some part, ran on inflation. Inflation is high today. It's higher today than it was this time last year under Joe Biden. You've got 7 million Americans who are unemployed. You've got layoffs surging 40% last month alone. Donald Trump's policies are choking the American middle class, and Democrats have to take that and they have to incorporate that into their message. This economy is a complete disaster. You've got $1.2 trillion in credit card debt, largely because Americans are now relying on that and buy now, pay later just to buy groceries in Donald Trump's economy. And so it matters. The economy always matters, and Democrats have to use that.
So, Brendan, Trump does get slightly higher marks on crime, 43% approval on that. But only 1 in 5 respondents say they often feel unsafe because of high crime in their area. And then only 32% of Americans say they'd feel safer with armed soldiers deployed to large cities in their states. So is Trump going farther than the public wants?
Well, we often find in polling that people say that they are doing personally better, whether it's economically, maybe with crime, than they feel like the country is doing. And that's just sort of this dynamic that we were talking about earlier, sort of social media always telling you things are terrible. I will say, I don't think the economy is a disaster. I think that there are real warning signs in the economy, and most people show that they actually feel okay themselves. But there's a lot of people who look out and see more crime than they would like. They see prices higher than they would like, and it creates an uneasiness. Donald Trump, I think, was elected largely to fix the economic problems that existed under Joe Biden, cost of living. I mean, that was the bottom line. He had to fix that, and he's really not done a lot to help there. And in fact, we can argue pretty clearly that his tariff policy is making it worse. So at some point, that's going to come due, and you're starting to see that softening in his polling. at the same time, he's got a base of about 40% of the country who's never going to turn away from him. So it may not matter a ton in the end.
Well, here's something that, though, the president could be worried about, because, Michael, Americans are wary of Trump's attempts to expand his power. 62% say the president should not have the power to control police in their city or town. 59% say the president should not control museums and theaters. 57% say the president should not set interest rates and direct companies where to manufacture their goods. How do Democrats harness that?
Again, they have to incorporate that, just like this terrible economy. That has to be a part of their message. America was founded because we don't want kings. That's the whole point of this country. And so Donald Trump is trying to behave like a king. The Speaker of the House is letting him behave like a king. The Senate Majority Leader is letting him behave like a king. The Democrats have to use this energy that voters have on both sides in terms of wanting their autonomy and not wanting to be ruled by a king, and incorporate that into their platform. I mean, the idea that he wants to essentially use American soldiers domestically against American voters is outrageous. It's outrageous. If he thinks crime is up, he should do like Bill Clinton did in the 90s and hire 100,000 more cops across this country. Instead, he's cutting police budgets. That is the issue, and Democrats have to message that and inform voters of that.
So, Brendan, 31% say the president should be able to run the country without interference from courts and Congress. 31%. Does that number give Trump the mandate he claims he has?
Well, no, but that's absolutely the number that sticks out to me there. That's an extraordinarily high number of people in this country who feel like a president should be unencumbered by the way our government was founded and has operated for 250 years. I mean, that's stunning. And I think it just kind of shows you the sort of cult of personality that exists around him. Our country is great for a lot of reasons, and one of them is the separation of powers. And they are obviously trying to whittle away at that. I don't think that a lot of these issues are really under threat. I don't think most city police departments are under threat. I don't think most museums are under threat. But the fact that many people tell you that they are okay with that kind of thing tells you all you need to know about how Donald Trump operates. You know, he gets all that feedback that people cheer on when he does stuff. When he goes into a city, people cheer. And that just reinforces him doing more and more stuff like that.
Hang on. Is that going to be mostly a pro-MAGA or people that identify as MAGA? Because you said 40% of the country is never going to leave him. And only 31% said we're good with him running the country the way he wants to.
I still think that's a really high number for people. Those are all clearly his supporters, but that's the world he lives in. I mean, we are back to kind of where we've always been with Donald Trump, where there's about a third of the country who is going to be with him forever. There's another 10 or 15% they're going to give him the benefit of the doubt, and then the other half of the country just doesn't like him. I mean, that's just kind of how we are as a country, and he doesn't really care about that half that doesn't like him. He cares about that 30 to 40% that's with him all the time, and he's going to keep riding as long as they're riding with him.
So, Michael, speaking of the economy, you have Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, who was questioned by Axios about many of the warning signs that we are seeing lately. Take a listen.
Inflation in August ticking up to 4.3%, the highest since 21. Manufacturing activity shrank in August, 6 months running. Unemployed workers exceeding job openings. If Biden had numbers like that, you'd be on Fox saying, what's going on?
So the economy that Donald Trump owns starts at the end of this year. You can't get, well.
Does it work that way? Will voters give Trump grace on this? And if so, for how long?
We would have to be stupid to believe what he just said. It's completely outrageous that the Secretary of Commerce is telling us that the president is not responsible for this current economy when he controls every branch of government, and because his trade war is driving this economy off a cliff. Of course, voters are smarter than he gives them credit for. They're not going to believe that, because this current economy, with 7 million unemployed people and people struggling just to get by with sky-high prices, is Donald Trump's economy. And going back to our earlier conversation, it is the job of Democrats to educate voters on that fact.
Brendan, I'm going to give you the last word on this one. How do you see it?
Well, he's hardly the first politician to say they've got a lot of work to do to dig out from the past. I mean, you would hear that all the time from Obama and things like that. So that's not necessarily novel. What I find funny is that this is an administration that sure likes to take credit when there is a good jobs month or there is a low inflation month. They'll jump on that any moment. People will give someone grace for 4, 5, 6 months. But at this point, when things are not even moving in the right direction on cost of living, that's going to catch up pretty quickly. Again, I think there's a lot of people who are never going to bail on him. But this was the fundamental reason he was elected, I think, cost of living. And they're moving in the wrong direction. There's going to be a lot of upset people. And I think it's going to have a pretty significant impact on his ability to govern and his legacy.
Okay, Michael Hardaway, Brendan Buck. See you guys next weekend. Many thanks.
Memphis, Tennessee is now the latest city where President Trump plans to deploy the National Guard. This is part of his so-called effort to crack down on crime. Here's what he said yesterday on Fox News.
We're going to Memphis. That's the next city. Deeply troubled. And the mayor is happy. He's a Democrat mayor. The mayor is happy. And the governor, Tennessee, the governor is happy. Deeply troubled with National Guard and anybody else we need. And by the way, we'll bring in the military, too, if we need it.
And last hour, Memphis Mayor Paul Young had this to say about the president's plans.
The National Guard was something that we just found out about. It's not something that I believe is going to help reduce crime in our city. I think that the way to reduce crime is to invest in the things that are going to intervene and prevent crime in the first place and help us identify the small number of people that are wreaking the most havoc in our community.
Joining us now, Lee Harris, mayor of Shelby County, Tennessee's largest county, both in population and geographic area. Its county seat is the city of Memphis. Mayor, I am a fellow Mid-Southerner and love Memphis and have spent a lot of time there. We both know that crime has been a problem and there's a shortage of corrections officers at your Shelby County jails, sheriff's office, and the Memphis Police Department has struggled with recruitment. Is there any way that the National Guard can be utilized to address these staffing shortages in the short term?
No, not at all. And thanks for having me. I think that the problem is that we would sacrifice too much to allow military personnel to come into our cities, to come into the state of Tennessee. We'd be the first state in the South to have military personnel patrol our streets. And so I think that undermines all of our American traditions and norms, and it also undermines our freedoms. And so, no, we don't need the National Guard in town. And I'm more troubled, deeply troubled, in fact, by the clip you just showed, which said that not only would they send the National Guard in, but I think Trump said the military or anything else that he needs. And so if that's not a blanket threat to all the things that we hold dear, I don't know what is. And so, no, we don't need the war machine in Memphis and Shelby County, not at all. Obviously, we need partnership, but partnership can come in other forms. But this is not it.
Mayor Harris, it's good to see you. I spent some time with you when I covered the Tyree Nichols case, and so I know how much heartbreak your city has and county have been through in recent years. Can you talk to us a bit about what it will be like for residents to actually see and experience this? And what kind of tensions could boil over for a city that has already been through so much, where trust and repair and tensions over policing have been such a challenge already without the intervention of this president? What are you concerned could transpire because of this move?
Well, I think that's a great point. And so what happens if you send military personnel, armored vehicles, and individuals carrying semi-automatic weapons into an American city? Well, it's going to have the effect that we can all anticipate. There's going to be widespread fear and paralysis. There are a lot of folks that are going to stay home because they're fearful of being caught up in a dragnet. That's particularly true of our community, the most diverse in Tennessee. And so we have a substantial Latino population. And so whether you're in America legal or not, you will be afraid of being targeted. You'll be afraid of your due process rights being violated because there'll be personnel on your streets who may not have the right kinds of training. At the same time, it'll change the tone and caliber of what it means to, live in Tennessee and live in a free country, because you'll probably have to pass through checkpoints to move from place to place. And so it's going to create a lot of tension, a lot of fear. Obviously, it's going to immobilize people. Our businesses are going to close down. Churches are not going to hold services, at least Latino churches are not going to hold services. It has has vast ramifications, and they're going to be permanent and last and last a long time. So I'd ask anyone that's in the decision-making chain to please reconsider, and let's make America great again. Let's go back to the America where there were freedoms intact. People could travel where they want to travel, and they didn't have to fear interacting with a war machine in their homes.
Can I ask you, Mr. Mayor, about the political dynamics here? Because Tennessee would be the first state in which the National Guard is being deployed with a Republican governor. Obviously, it has been met with opposition in states like California. D.C., completely different legal status, and so was unable to really push back against the administration. It seems that the governor of Tennessee, Bill Lee, is talking about this with, I guess, with a sense of welcomeness to the fact that this decision is coming. I'm just curious to get your thoughts on it, how the governor is reacting to this, and what you make of the fact that this is the National Guard being deployed in a red state, but in a specifically blue city within that red state with the embrace of the governor.
Well, I think that no one wants this on their legacy. Anyone in decision-making authority shouldn't want to be the first state in the South to see the National Guard descend and occupy a community. No one wants to be, even from the governor's perspective, I would think he wouldn't want to be the first Republican governor in the country to have his state occupied by military personnel. So I'm not sure why there is cooperation on some of these points. But to your point about the legality, this still feels like this is at the order of Donald Trump. You showed a clip of Donald Trump order that military personnel, National Guard, or whatever's needed, descend upon Memphis. That's coming from a federal official who just about a week ago or so had a court case decided against him to say that he could not send the military into these states and so forth. And yet he's making that order on national TV with millions of people watching. So, I'm fearful of where this is going. I don't know why there is cooperation so far on some level, but the orders are coming straight from Donald Trump. That's a federal official. And, we're going to be exploring our legal options to the extent we have any to see if there's a way to stop this if we can't convince through persuasive arguments for the governor and whoever else is in this decision-making chain to back down.
Can I ask you quickly, are you in conversation? Are you collaborating right now with Mayor Paul Young?
Oh, absolutely. And I think Mayor Young is doing an excellent job. I think he has a few considerations, like how do you coordinate and keep things stable with the Memphis Police Department and those who may who come to our town and not necessarily follow some of our rules and not necessarily trained on how to interact with the folks that we have who are resident here. And so I think he's doing a great job of navigating a lot of different kinds of demands. But yeah, we're in close communication as we always are. City, county work hand in hand. But what we really need is to make sure that our voices are heard by Donald Trump. And this is just not the America we want. We want to go back to a time when Americans were free, prior to Inauguration Day, prior to Liberation Day, and prior to the takeover and occupation of California and D.C. We want to go back to when America was free.
All right, Shelby County Mayor Lee Harris, thank you so much, sir. Greatly appreciate having you on the show this evening.
Well, join me right now with Arizona Congresswoman Yasmin Ansari. She is on the Oversight, Education, and Natural Resources Committees. Welcome back to the broadcast. I know that you have lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, including Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, also Nancy Mace. They are canceling appearances. They are beefing up security after this killing. Do you share their fears and concerns?
I absolutely share their fears and concerns. I think all of us here in Congress and elected officials across the country are terrified about the rising tide of political violence in this country. Whether you talk about January 6th, talk about the assassination of the lawmakers in Minnesota, to the horrific killing of Charlie Kirk. This is a very, very scary time. And I think it is so vital that as leaders and anyone with a platform in this moment to be very, very mindful, to practice empathy, and to try to turn down the temperature, because this is unacceptable and we cannot keep moving in this direction.
Yeah. All right, let's move to what happened this week with the Oversight Committee having released that trove of records handed over by the Epstein estate, including that 238-page birthday book containing a lewd message allegedly sent from President Trump, as well as many other notes alluding to Epstein's relations with young women. How important, Congresswoman, is this book to the committee's investigation? What do you make of Trump's claim that his birthday note was a forgery and Republican resistance to investigate its authenticity?
Unfortunately, Donald Trump's remarks about this birthday book, along with everything else pertaining to Epstein, there has been a lot of flip-flopping and a lot of lying coming from the very top administration officials. Allegedly, this note never existed. Then the White House changed its tune to say that it's the signature that shows that the note is fake. I think this is absolutely worth investigating. I think that we are completely committed as oversight Democrats to make sure that we get the full files. Ultimately, that is what we need. And the subpoena is very clear that we need to get the full files. And what's important to remember is that Republicans and the DOJ continue to stall, and all they have sent is 33,000 pages, 97% of which were already in the public domain. So we are continuing to push for the full release of the unredacted files. We need to make sure that the discharge petition also reaches the number of signatures that it needs so that every single person can go on the record to say, do they believe in accountability for perpetrators of horrific sex abuse against children, or do they want to protect the most powerful people in this country and billionaires and pedophiles who have perpetrated these crimes?
Beyond the birthday book, what new did you learn this week relative to all of this?
I think the birthday book was important in that, first of all, there are clearly materials at the Epstein estate that are important. It also showed a pattern from Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, of how comfortable the people in his inner circle were making jokes and talking about his relationship and affinity for children. Much of it was quite salacious, lewd. I mean, very, very disturbing stuff was in there. So I think that was what stood out to me the most, is that all of these people, in addition to Donald Trump, were willing to write to him, and write in this kind of way. All of it was sex related and related to how he sees women and girls.
You mentioned the discharge petition. It's bipartisan in its promotion. It's to force a floor vote on the release of the Epstein files. One more signature away now from the 218 needed after the newly sworn-in Virginia Congressman James Walkinshaw signed that petition. How confident are you you'll get that one more vote?
Well, I'm extremely confident because in a matter of weeks, we will have a new member of the House from my state, future Congresswoman Adelita Grijalva. So I'm confident that with more Democrats, we will get the signatures. What is bothering me and what I still cannot fathom is how we don't have more Republican signatories, and especially Republican men. When we sat in the room with the closed door meeting we had with the survivors of Epstein, there were several Republican men in the room with us from the Oversight Committee who sat there, listened to the testimonies and the horrific stories that.
And what was their reaction? What was their reaction listening?
They showed empathy. I mean, they asked questions, they feigned care and concern, and promised accountability, asked a lot of questions. And, people like Brandon Gill, people like Congressman Perry, Mike Johnson was in the room the whole time himself and said, many things to these women about how he empathizes with them and what they went through was horrific, and people need to be held accountable. So why don't they sign the petition and demand that the White House release these files? And again, everybody knows this, but Donald Trump could have these files released anytime, any moment if he wanted to. The White House is purposefully covering this up. And as always, Republicans in Congress are enabling this. And what I want to understand is why.
I was going to say, that is the question that, because of the delays, keeps getting asked. All right, Congresswoman Yasmin Ansari, thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you again.